So what I'd like to talk about today is the mortal in the portal, or why almost everything you learn in library school is wrong. And as a professor in library school, I should know exactly how I've been screwing you people up for years. But I want to begin by sort of telling you something, and that is the fact that I have cancer. I have Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was diagnosed stage 3. I've gone through 6 months of chemotherapy. That's me before and after the process, and you see me now. And it turns out that I'm going to have to go back in and get a whole new blood system, which would be very exciting. Now, I tell you this for a couple of reasons. The first reason is to explain why I couldn't be there in person, because frankly, Austin's one of my favorite cities, and that took a lot. The second reason to tell you is basically a shameless ploy to kiss up and get your sympathy. That way, no matter how crappy this keynote is, you'll still find it inspirational. It's hard to tell cancer jokes because you're never quite sure how people are going to take them. Like, how many cancer patients does it take to change a light bulb? 12. One guy to screw in the light bulb and 11 to form a support group to say, way to go. But it's really interesting because when I went through this process and diagnosed, I get all these wonderful messages telling me how wonderful I am and how brave I am, and it's like I cross the street and people clap, and it's hilarious because it's not very brave going through chemotherapy. It's kind of like finding it inspirational if someone puts on a coat when it's snowing. It's kind of like my other choice would be to die. I think I'll take chemo. But it's this sort of common sense, right? We have this common conception of when someone's like this, someone loses their hair and their eyebrows, that was the roughest, that somehow, they're strong and supportive and all that wonderful stuff. And I've been thinking a lot about common sense over this time. And common sense is something that one of the things I do when I go to conferences is I sit down and I ask employers, what do you want? What are you looking for out of our students? And the first thing they say is, common sense. I mean, before metadata and Dublin Core and all this other stuff, common sense. And my favorite quote about common sense actually comes from good old Albert here, which is common sense is the collection of prejudices acquired by age 18. Right? We have all of these commonly held beliefs that we don't look at very critically. We take them sort of at face value. Yeah. You can't. But they're, you can't see my slides because I haven't shared them with you. All right, this makes much more sense. Okay, let's see. I'll start back here. How about now? Yes. Oh, all right, I'm going to go through them again because they're really pretty. So I have cancer. No. And so this is me without eyebrows, so that was that little line, and just looking handsome, huh? And here's Albert. There's Albert, the common sense collection of prejudices. So anyway, blah, 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 blah. Thinking about common sense. Common sense is one of those things that we hold, and there's a lot of stuff that we just don't look at very critically. We just sort of take it at face value. It's just the way it is. And in the library world, we have tons of these. Everything from things like, no noise in our metadata, up to libraries are good and necessary things. And libraries collect, organize, and provide access to information. So I want to take these two, and for the next couple of minutes, and hopefully time for Q&A at the end, I want to really sort of break down and look at them critically for a moment, because I don't think that we really address them properly all the time. And the first thing that I think we take for granted that is wrong is that we are often taught that we are a building, that we are an organization. And if you look at our mission statement to what we do, to how we define ourselves, it all is about libraries. How many press releases have you put out in the past year or 2 years, or read in the past year from your organization that start with, the library did this, the library is hosting the library is providing an exhibit of, you can access the library through, right? It's the idea that somehow this building or this org chart's doing something. It doesn't, right? All a building can do is exert gravity and decay. And I think that all too often, we just sort of accept the idea of the royal we. So I think that the first bit of common sense we need to get rid of is the idea that libraries do anything, right? We really need to talk about how librarians are good and necessary thing, and librarians collect, organize, and provide access to information. We are, as I'll talk about in a bit, part of a professional service industry or movement that really is about human beings delivering what they're doing. I think all too often we slough off our genius onto our stacks and our buildings, and we need to stop doing it. Now, I should also, before we go too far into this, spend a moment about how I define a librarian, because when I talk to communities, particularly when I talk to technically oriented communities, there's a group of people who feel pride that they're librarians, and there's a group of people who feel that they're shafted by librarians on a regular basis because they don't have a key to the executive washroom. So, my definition of a librarian is someone that if a bus hits them on the way to work, a significant part of the library's operations will stop, right? So, you know, if you got that status through a degree, if you got that status through a job title, or if you got that status because you've earned it by what you do and how important you are to an organization, you're a librarian to me. And so I have a pretty wide definition. So the first thing I want to address is, as we look at what we do, as we build digital libraries, those digital libraries, those digital collections, those physical collections, those buildings, they do nothing. They represent material that human beings chose, organized, put online, consume, use, etc. That at its heart, while we've moved from sort of a humanities perspective on librarianship to an information perspective on librarianship to, I would argue, a knowledge perspective on librarianship, throughout all of that is the fundamental contribution of the human, of the individual. But I'll come back to that in a second. Let me start with this second point, that librarians collect, organize, and provide access to information. Because I think that's another one of those, we take it as common sense. We buy the fact that somehow this is a good mission for us, and this is something we feel familiar with. But if we sort of break that down for a minute, some of it doesn't work very well, particularly when you change it from an institution to an individual, but even within an institutional context. For whom do we collect, organize, and provide access to information? I mean, when you say you do this, do you spend time worrying about who gets the benefit from it? And more fundamentally, why do we do this? I mean, a paycheck is fine, but frankly, our paychecks aren't high enough to really drive us crazy. But this notion of why we do this is also fundamental and important. A lot of how we define our field and our skills and our individuals by what we do. But we do them for a reason. So why? But I'm going to sort of leave this as obvious, right? This is our mission statement. Yes, we've learned this. Fine. I learned that in library school. It still stands. Leave me alone, Dave. I got it. I want to pick on this word, because this is the one that I think is the funniest word ever, because it means absolutely nothing. And yet we treat it as if it's sacrosanct and fundamental to what we do. Right? I want to give a brief confession. The brief confession is that I'm a professor at a School of Information Studies. I am a PhD in information science. I am surrounded by PhDs in information science, which is just a joy all the time. And so one day I'm sort of thinking on this word information, and I said, hey, let's go figure out what it is. And so I asked 5 different faculty members, 5 different of my fellow professor types, what is information? And I actually got 7 different answers. And my favorite was, I don't know and I don't care. You think about it, we use this word all the time, but what is it? What does it really mean, right? Dave, I know what it is. This is my job. I do this all the day. There it is. Ta-da! And it even has, greater than and less than signs. So it's like math, but, with words. It's a document. It's things that we share back and forth. It's stuff. It's digital stuff. It's physical stuff. It's stuff. The problem is, that's not, what is it useful to? I mean, if you actually think about this for a moment, and you look at that little code, which is obviously just a garbage sample, that's not intended for human beings. Right? That's intended for machines to go back and forth. So do machines transfer information? Do machines understand what information is? Is it document, not document? The other thing that we face on a regular basis, of course, is the death of documents. What is a document when we can change it instantaneously? Is Google a document? Is Facebook a document? What do we do when we break these things apart? We talk about e-books and e-journals as if we knew what they were, but the truth is we're just throwing E in front of a word and hope for the best, right? An e-book is an app. right? It's got text, it's got images, increasingly it's got capability. You put together a textbook on accounting, for example. Why not include, this is how to do a spreadsheet, and by the way, check it and try it. You're including connections in it, which you could never do in a book. Is it still a book? So you say, oh, Dave, I'm not fooled. I know. Sorry about that. All right. No, don't clap for that. Okay, where was I? Oh yes, for whom, for why. Okay, so we give up on what a document is. We talked about the data, information, wisdom, knowledge, blah 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 blah. The problem with this is that it's complete garbage. It's, fundamental to the field, but I'm willing to say that because I have tenure. Think about it for a minute. We kind of know what data is. Ones and zeros, the idea of measurements, something being transferred all around. And then we say, well, information is data with context. That is, data that we sort of add measurements to and make sense to us. And then if we understand how it integrates into everything else we understand, we call it knowledge. And if we have the ability to put it into action, that's wisdom. Well, that's great. But what that means is that ultimately we're defining information by the individual who's absorbing the information. That is, what is information to me, what counts as context, and what is information to you can be radically different. Worse, it doesn't, we say, oh, it's semantic data, things like that. But what if you look at something like a rock? I know that sounds odd, a rock, big deal. But a geologist looks at that, and they can get things like what it's made from, how old it is, what its composition is. If it has etchings on the front, an anthropologist can look at it and talk about social significance, etc. I look at it and I say, it's a rock. Right? So what's information and what's a document, it begins to break down because it all becomes what we know, what it is. And then we say, no problem, we can Ferberize it, and then we'll understand it completely. Is it me, or is it Ferber sort of died a quiet death as RDA is rushed in to take over our paranoia? But and I love this idea about what is a work, and then a work has an expression, and then it has a manifestation, it has an item, but then this doesn't really handle the problem about what do we do when documents don't exist past the idea of from second to second and minute to minute. So I don't like this word information. It doesn't make sense to me. It's not very useful. What I prefer is the idea of knowledge. And that is, you're going, well, Dave, great. That's completely fundamentally well understood. We haven't been debating that for epistemology since, Socrates said, hey, hemlock, great idea. But knowledge to me actually makes more sense because it sort of has, for me, a functional definition. The first thing is that it's fundamentally a human phenomenon. In other words, we don't deal with what's being transferred back and forth, the data and all this. We deal with what's in people's heads, right? So the way you understand, the way you behave, the way you see the world, that's knowledge. And we can assess it, and we can evaluate it, and we can test it. We can hopefully grow it and modify it, but it's a fundamentally human process. And furthermore, where does it come from? It comes from engaging in conversations. That is, that we have conversations with those who know more about something, sometimes those who know less about something, but we're constantly engaged in conversations to learn and modify how we see the world. And the majority of those conversations are with ourselves. And so we're constantly talking to ourselves, hopefully not out loud in a public place, but we're constantly having these discussions about, does this make sense? Oh, I get it. Oh, this could be useful here. Those dialogues how we build it. But we don't build it as this wonderful hierarchical, subject-oriented system in our heads. We build it as a series of networks. So the other thing we know about knowledge is that knowledge comes from conversation. It's uniquely human, and it's unique to a human. That is, how you understand a word, how you understand a concept is unique to you. I'll give you a quick example. I'm going to give you a word, and I want you to think of a definition. Okay, ready? The word is formula. Formula. All right. Now, I can't see you, but I'll take it as an honor system. How many people thought a combination of mathematical symbols? I assume that's a lot. How many people thought of that as a chemical combination? The formula is a set of chemicals and how they combine. Dot, dot, dot. How many of you thought of something you give to a baby to keep it from starving to death? Now, what's interesting is anyone who, by the way, identifies that probably recently had a child, a niece, a nephew, or a grandchild because it's on the top of their mind. And why is that funny, by the way? The reason it's funny is because it makes sense, but it's unexpected. Right? In our everyday life, we build strong relationships between chemistry and formula or mathematics and formula, but it's kind of rare that we think about baby formula unless that's where we are in the middle of our life. That's why a joke works, is it makes sense, but it's unexpected. So let's replace that word knowledge for a moment and talk about that librarians collect, organize, and provide access to conversations and their relationships to objects and other conversations. If you're in the knowledge business, if you're in the library business, you're in the conversation business. This means fundamentally we're in the learning business. So for so long, we spent a lot of time to worry about well-organized and well-formed metadata and hierarchies that make sense and menus and usability and user experience, and we kept missing the point. The point isn't we have well-organized stuff. The point isn't that we've built sculptures of code. The point is we've helped people do something they couldn't do before. And that means that we need to assess ourselves not on how beautiful our code is or how well we've implemented a system, but on how well people have learned and been able to do new things. How well we've looked at conversations and how we've organized things not as hierarchical blah, 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 but how we've organized them as a series of conversations that make sense. So let me jump back here to our common sense things again. Right? So we've dealt with the second one, that librarians collect, organize, and provide access to information. Really, we know that's knowledge conversations. Let's take on the second one. The librarians are good and necessary things. It's common sense. Of course, what's interesting is right now, people are equally likely to go, we'll be obsolete in 10 years, but we ignore them. So let's take this on for a moment. The librarians are good and necessary things. And I want to show you my favorite digital library slide of all time. The mortal behind the portal, this space left intentionally blank. This was Bill Arms. I don't know if Bill's around anymore, but I love this slide because it pisses me off on a regular basis. Right? This was, if you go back to the days of the National Science Foundation wanting to build massive digital libraries, the National Science Digital Library, all this wonderful stuff, the idea was that we could automate it all. That we had so many computer scientists busily helping put us out of a job that we said, yay! Right? But the truth is, we know this is not true. Right? But it's not true unless you think of the person doing it as relatively innocuous and invisible. In other words, what Bill was saying here was that his goal was to automate as much as possible because the value added by librarians, by individuals, by the people in the digital library was in essence a stopgap measure until we could automate something. And here's the trick. If all you define your value as is a series of functions, he's right. How do we make sure that he's not right? How do we make this common sense go from a nice euphemism to please keep me employed to something that really means something? And for me, that comes around this concept of professional service. And what is a professional service? What do you mean? Well, first, a professional service is an industry or a profession that holds that service is important. Duh. Right? But what that means is it's the ultimate test of our value. The ultimate test of our contribution comes not in our efforts, but on the efforts of those that we serve. In other words, if I'm an academic librarian, my value comes not from what I do, but how well a student learns or how well a faculty progresses in their research. If I'm a public librarian, the value isn't how many hours I spend on the desk or how well my collection's organized, it's how well my community is able to meet their dreams and aspirations. The second is that the provider is an essential part of the service. So there are plenty of services. Let's take something like trash collection, where frankly, you're not really that concerned to meet and interview the trash collector. You're more interested in is the trash gone, right? This is not something where they are an essential part of it. But we have plenty of industries such as medicine, such as teaching, such as librarianship, where it's actually the individual and the contact skills, communication ability, the relationships to that professional that matters. And increasingly, across the professional service population, an increasing outcome is knowledge creation. What do I mean by that? Well, as I mentioned, I'm going through a bit of a health issue right now, which means I get to meet lots of doctors. And I have to tell you, my favorite doctor type that I've met so far is a surgeon. Surgeons would be best satisfied if they could have conversations with you while you are anesthetized and ready to be cut open. Right? So it's like, I meet with this surgeon and we did this wonderful thing. It's like, I got to go get this lymph node, and, if I can't get to it, I'm going to turn you on your side, I'm going to drop a lung, collapse a lung, and then I'm going to grab it. And then you'll be fine. And I was just like, collapse a lung? And then afterwards he goes, well, there's a few potential hazards, like, we might accidentally, paralyze your vocal cords or your diaphragm. And it was like, how do you breathe without a diaphragm? He's like, oh, your chest muscles go like this. And I'm like, can you tell me if it's paralyzed? He goes, can you breathe? For now I can. So my point is that that's not exactly a great relationship, and this is sort of the old school of medicine, right? I'm a collection of symptoms and problems. I sit in an office, an expert looks at me and says, thou shalt be cut open and healed, and I walk away. But these days, that's not how it works, right? I get to pick and choose. What's more is we have this whole area of the worried well. So this is an image of the Fitbits, or I forget what it's called, but you wear it and it tells you how long you've slept, how much you've walked, how many stairs you've gone up, etc. Now when the doctor looks at me and says, so Dave, have you been exercising? And I say, yes, lying through my teeth, he can say, your risks tells me differently, right? This idea that I can become responsible for my health, that I can see how well I'm doing, that I can provide and have contributions back and forth. We have a situation where the doctors say, well, we think we should do this, and my wife comes in with like these 50 Medline articles going, well, what about this one, and what about this one, and what about this one? That forms a radically different relationship where the doctor's job isn't just to make you well. The doctor's job is to teach you how to stay well. And we've shown in clinical trials that the more you educate patients in patient-centered management, the better the outcome. We see this in higher education, where we talk about flipping the classroom. And flipping the classroom doesn't just mean lecturing people in their pajamas. It means, right, it means you start with, what do you want to know? Where do you want to learn? Let's come in. Let's talk about it. But I want to show, these two examples are interesting because both of them are traditionally seen as big pie-in-the-sky guru experts that then turn and sort of hand off knowledge, right? And we're talking about suddenly forming a relationship which it's much more about a conversation and negotiation. But in both cases, we don't take the expertise out. In other words, we can't just take anyone we want to talk about cancer with. They still need to be a trained doctor. Right? We talk about a professor flipping the classroom. It's not anyone teaches all the classes. It's you help guide it and you're important doing it. This is fundamental to librarianship because the same thing is true. That we're guided by a mission where we have a value and an expertise and yet need to increasingly encounter these participation and conversation. So all these professional services are guided by a mission. So what mission do librarians have? I would argue this is the mission librarians have. That the mission of librarians is to improve society through facilitating knowledge creation in their communities. What does that mean? Well, we've already talked about librarians. That this means people, not institutions. I don't put this forward as a mission for all libraries, right? Because some libraries are going to do it in one way, some are going to do it another. I say this is the individual, the person. We already know that this knowledge creation doesn't simply mean we hand them a book, or as we've looked at in reference classes, get them to a material and walk the hell away. I had some students who are visiting our libraries on campus as part of their introductory course, and she's like, this reference librarian asked me, can I help you? And I sort of had to quickly come up with an answer, and I said, yes, I need information on Christopher Columbus. And the reference librarian, she said, he quickly went online, he searched for things, he handed me the first one and said, here you go, and walked away. She goes, I have no idea if this was useful. I have no idea if this is even on the topic, all this other stuff. We've trained the idea of librarianship, reference, public service, digital libraries is get someone to the stuff. Right? That's what our search discussion is. That's what Ferber discussion is. Right? How do we make our metadata powerful enough and connected enough that people can do a quick, intelligent search and get to the stuff? But what if that stuff's a conversation? What if that stuff's an argument? What if that stuff is a conversation going on? So we need to think as our digital libraries, when we're searching, how are we searching What do we want to find? What is our ultimate goal here? Now, what you can sit there and look at this mission and go, well, this is a mission of librarians, but it could be a mission of publishers, teachers. You just said it could be a mission of doctors. What makes this librarians? And that's how we facilitate conversations. So how does a librarian facilitate this learning, facilitate a conversation? The first one is easy. It's the one we think of all the time. That is providing access. I would remind you access to conversations, but access to materials and stuff is part of a conversation, fine. But access is only the first part. This comes out of the notion of the digital divide when people didn't have access to the internet, so they couldn't vote. These days they have access to the internet, they can't get health care. Totally different topic. But the idea of access was give them a computer, give them stuff, and walk away. But we know that access isn't enough. In other words, we saw this in K-12 education. We gave computers to teachers and said, go, be brilliant. We're giving them iPads and saying, go, teach differently. But they don't know how. But the second means of facilitation, what a librarian does is not simply provide access, but they provide a series of training. They increase the knowledge of the person learning, right? And so we do training. Every reference interaction is actually an instructional session. When you think about what we used to do with training, bibliographic instruction, right? We used to teach people this is what Dewey is or Library of Congress is, this is how to use this database, this is how to do whatever. But now we know that it's actually about teaching people what the language is they're using, what are the norms of the conversation. Joan Battelle in the 80s had the best line. She goes, the purpose of an academic library is not to provide access, it's to teach people about scholarly communication. That when we think about a researcher doesn't just write papers and read papers. What they're seeking to do is engage their colleagues in an ongoing peer-reviewed conversation to develop knowledge. That means that our job is not simply to collect papers and distribute papers. It's to help them through that entire process. So we have access, we have knowledge to do it, but now we need the idea of, why aren't my slides moving forward? Oh no. Excuse me a second. I'll keep talking while my computer breaks. That's great. Let me try one thing. That's really cool. Okay. The other thing is after we provide training, we need to provide a learning environment for them to do it in, right? So they get access to the conversation, they know what they're doing, but do they feel safe in doing it? Do they understand what they're doing and how they're doing it? And so the idea is that it's not enough to say, here's the stuff. Can they look at the stuff without feeling followed? Can they keep their privacy in accessing that information? Do they feel stupid because they got smarter people looking at it? There was a great study that they did in the UK, and they put students through academic databases, literature databases, EBSCO and such. And they asked the students, what do you think? And they said, it's quiet. And they said, what do you mean it's quiet, right? Because as catalogers, we say, yay, reduce noise. But that's not what they meant. What they meant was there was no one there telling them, hey, have you seen this? Did you look at this? Hey, your buddies looked at this before. Hey, your professor thought this was interesting. Think about how we use Twitter, how we use Facebook, how we use social media. Many of us use it as a distributed social search system. We use it to find information and collect information. So this idea of environment. The last one is motivation. How do we gather motivation? How do we motivate people so that when they're looking at the information, we can reward them? And this isn't just giving them badges, but we look at this as giving them degrees, we give them expertise, we give them certification. But how do we understand why they want to find something? So we have to understand motivation. But here's the big thing. I'm sorry I'm stuck on this slide, but I'm going for it anyway. The big thing is that ultimately what we need to look at is that last part of the mission statement. That the mission of librarians is to improve society. And we should feel free to stop it there. We deal with facilitation, we deal with knowledge creation, we can deal with it in an academic way. We can pretend we know what it means. But the idea here is, why are we doing it? Back to the big why question. We do it to make our communities better. We do it to make our universities smarter. We do it to make our humanities scholars more informed and to discover new things. We do it to help our students learn. We do it to help the public understand their culture, to understand their history. We do it for a reason. And we come back to the notion of professional service. And that is, what does it mean to provide service? And what does it mean to provide service as a professional? what does it ultimately mean to be a librarian? And the answer is to change the world, to improve society, is not to be invisible. You can't be invisible to do this. It's not to be neutral or unbiased. The root word of neutral is neuter. Yay. I don't, that's where to go. Right? We have to have a reason of why we're doing this. We have to have a reason of why we're making a change, why we put these things on. And it's not so that we get something to do on a Thursday morning. And it's not because the stuff's there and it's just begging to have metadata attached to it. Right? We're doing it so that we can make the world a better place. We're doing it so that people can learn. We're doing it so people can understand. To change the world, to improve society is not invisibility, it's not neutrality, it's not a bias. It is a radical concept. Librarianship is a radical profession. I love the word radical. Clearly, I'm using it a lot because I love it so much. But the reason I love this word, because English is so fun, is that radical has three fundamental meanings. The first is extreme, on the outside, right? To be a radical leftist, etc. But the second means fundamental. It means at the root. A radical in biology, a radical in botany is the root system. It's the thing that you can transplant and get a new plant. When someone does a radical mastectomy, it's not that they're doing something crazy. It means they get the entire organ. They get the root of that organ. And the third meaning of radical is, of course, radical, cool, way out there. Back to you, Roy, California thing. Anyway, right? And if you put these three things together, that is, we seek to change at the extreme levels. We are advocates, actively participation in the improvement of society, and we do it not for fun or personal gain, but we do it based on our fundamental values and our fundamental mission. We do it based on why it's good for society. And we do it in a really cool way. We do it through visualization and data and collection. We do it through conversation in our spaces. But we do it for a radical reason. Librarians ultimately are radical change agents. We seek to go out and improve society and change society, not simply because we do a job. We do it to make things better. Ultimately, our job is a noble profession. It is not simply a task that we seek to accomplish. It is not simply the application of metadata. We are not a collection of skills brought to bear as a hammer is to a nail, but rather we are thoughtful, proactive individuals actively engaged in how to improve democracy and education within the society that we exist in. That is much more interesting than a library is a good administration. That is much more important than which metadata schema do we choose. Which metadata schema do we choose and how we choose and how we apply it. Fabulous, important stuff. But only in the service of our larger mission. By the time that we are done with application of metadata, with digitization of materials and user experience and usability systems and collection and all this stuff, we're only a millimeter of the way on a 12-mile ride. And that ride is to improve someone's life. That participation, that conversation, that engagement with our communities is more than users. Get rid of the word users. Right up there with words I hate. Information, number one. Actually, information is number two. Number one is user. Right? What a community goes out there and says, I want to be used. What a usury is a beneficial thing. This is insane. Right? Computer scientists and drug dealers have users, and librarians want to adopt it. Right? We don't have customers. We don't have consumers. We don't have people who simply come in, consume, and leave. What we have, if you want to use the word patron, I'm okay. I'm not an 18th century oil painter, so it doesn't exactly make sense to me, but I would prefer the word member. That is the idea that we have people not only use and consume, but they make the world a better place as well. They contribute. Contribute content, contribute annotations, fine. But they contribute to how we make sense of this information. Imagine a document that exists not in some hierarchy with some piece of metadata attached to it, but as a reference within a conversation. This is an important document. By says whom? By what? They're adding reputation. They're adding context. Think about for a moment what kind of policies we build around our physical spaces. We build libraries, we build physical spaces, storefronts, whatever. We set up policy, basically. when we can throw you out. All of those policies are about how to get along with other people. Whether you can be loud and talk, whether you can chew gum or not, whether you can destroy the furniture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now look at all the policies we have for our online spaces, for your digital libraries. What are they about? How not to be a thief. That's about it, right? It's not about how to get along, why not being a thief is a good thing, how to share recognition, how to build and contribute, how to talk to other people. That notion of community is what we're building. Digital libraries are not collections of stuff. Bill Arms is wrong when he talks about the mortal in the portal being intentionally left blank. But there's two sides to this. That mortal in the portal is not just you. That mortal in the portal also consists of the people who are part of that system, the people, the members who come in, who have dreams, who have aspirations for learning, who seek to improve the world. And their success, their ability to make this a better society, to make democracy better, to make learning better, to contribute more to the economy, to contribute more to learning and understanding the universe around us, their success dictates our success. And no machine, no metadata schema, no standard, no cloud, nothing can accomplish that. Only the people in this room. So as you leave this today, you go in and you, in Rachel's word, engage in the weeds. The important and absolutely necessary discussion of skills and technologies, of different contributions of materials and all of these things. Remember, they're tools. They're the things you use to do your real job. They are not your real job. They are the necessary skills to accomplish our ultimate goal, and our ultimate goal comes from the dreams and what our communities can do. That's what it means to be a librarian, and that's what our purpose of a digital library is, and that's what I encourage you all to think about and move forward. Thank you. I apologize for the slides screwing up. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
I don't know if that's on your end or my end.
I literally can't do anything.
Okay,
thank God.
I'm going to see if the guys can see if they can expand you so we can see you guys.
All right,
Hey, does anybody, we have some time today. David, do you have questions, comments, things on Twitter? Come up to the mics. Oh, come on, guys. Anybody? Well, if y'all don't have a question, I'm going to ask David. David, with all the stuff that's going on with NSA and Snowden and privacy, where does the libraries fit in? Because I think that's something when we talk about librarianship, it's privacy is a big deal. And with so much information going online, where is our role in this?
I think it's a great question, and I think this comes back to the notion of improving society. I don't want to say that we, as every individual, has to buy into the same notion of privacy and the same policy. But I think we need to look at our values. Our values are around service, yes, around learning, yes, and about openness, yes. But it's also about a safe environment. It's the idea of intellectual safety. We believe in intellectual safety, which often gets sort of privacy as a component of that. But too often, libraries take a very monolithic approach to privacy. It's either yes or no. We either keep your data or we destroy your data. And what I think we've learned from lots of leading up to Snowden and such is that privacy is actually a continuum of negotiated value. That is, there is value in me giving up my privacy. I'm willing to give up my privacy for service, sometimes for fun, sometimes for security, but there are things that I don't want to give up. I think that librarians have a role in engaging in that debate, but we need to get past the idea of all infractions of this monolithic view of privacy are bad. I think we need to spend a lot of time learning and thinking about a nuanced view to privacy that up until this point we haven't been willing to do. And so Snowden is neither good nor bad, or neither all good nor all bad. What he has shown, which I think is very beneficial, is he's made people aware of their privacy. Has that also had an impact on our safety? I think probably yes, but I think That's the debate we need to have rather than privacy important, destroy data, we're getting out of the business.
I've got a question for you. This was a great talk, and I feel very inspired. But one of the words that you use a lot is we. And as someone who's not a librarian, I need to ask, who's that we, Kimosabe? I work in a library. I work with librarians. I'm a PhD in English with a degree in computer science. I am the wolf circling the fire for a lot of the people I work with. I would like to be inspired by the calls that you made to librarians and be part of that community. That's not necessarily what gets experienced day to day by us alt-act types who are invading that, not necessarily space, that space, yes, but that community that you're talking about. So it's not just outreach towards a community, but also some self-reflection, it seems to me, that needs to happen among librarians. What do you have to say to them about that?
I was at we held a series of conferences early in the century called the Virtual Reference Desk Conference, and I was sitting around, and the Virtual Reference Desk Conference actually began as a meeting of librarians doing virtual reference and what we called Ask Us services, which were scientists and experts who were answering questions online. My favorite Ask Us service in the whole world was Ask the Amish, which was an email service to ask the Amish a question. It was actually run by the Mennonite Center, where they'd read and run across the center, run across the field to go, by the way, how do you churn butter? And they come back. But by the third conference, it was all librarians, and I was sitting in a meeting, and I was commenting on this with someone from OCLC, and she made the comment, she goes, this isn't the first forum in which librarians have scared everyone else away. And I took that to heart. I think there are three ways to become a librarian. I think you do it through an education and certification process. It's one of the things I believe in. It's one of the things I'm part of. That's your MLS degree at the end. Yay. I think you do it by getting a job called a librarian, because I'm a realist. There are lots of people out there that have the title of librarian who didn't go through the degree. But the third one, which I think is the most important, it can go with either of the first two, is librarian by spirit. That is someone who has the same mission and commitment and value to moving forward and pushing ahead. And I think that librarians need to understand all three of those. We love the MLS that we do a horrible job in the universities. We hate the fact that people are hired librarians without the degrees, and yet that's a huge percentage of them. And we don't understand the power of the third. Having people who love what they do and love what we do and want to be part of that mission, we should make that door as wide open as we can. Because then you can take the mission back to the PhD's club that you come from, and we can take the mission here. Now, for those who don't want to make that ultimate jump and say, I'm a librarian and I'm going to own it, I think the idea is that WeBe needs to be always seen as an interdisciplinary group. No librarian can do this all by themselves. We need technologists, we need content experts, we need doctors of all sorts, right? We need this group to come together, and that can only happen if we value each other. Part of the reason I talk about professional service when the slides were working, part of the reason I talk about that is we actually have a lot of the same value and professional ethics that doctors do. Doctors are struggling with what librarians have been trying to embrace over the past 10 years, and we can help them. That would be helpful to our status. Librarians need to feel a little better about themselves, because when you always get picked on as low status, you tend to pick anyone else around you of lower status, pick on them. That's not a healthy relationship. So I think the short answer is we are those who identify with the mission. I think that that's interdisciplinary. We don't all have to serve the same purpose. And I think that we all need to see ourselves as valuable and noble professionals and not simply people who work in a library or implement or catalog metadata. And if we can do that, I think it will go a long way to us forming much healthier relationships with those who may not consider themselves librarians or who want to. Long way to go for that. I apologize.
Hey, this is Mark Hamilton from Figshare. Great talk. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about your previous answer that you gave with regards to privacy, and wondering if you we're inferring kind of data rights management and the whole idea of who owns the content as opposed to the privacy of people's content that they're producing. And also with regards to the changing role of librarians, maybe, and you were just talking about content management and the different skills they offer, and what you think about education being kind of one of those primary roles. Because when I was an academic, I had no idea about privacy or compliance with different regulations, and I was wondering, for me, it seems like content management is one thing that the changing role of the librarian is becoming more and more important. The other thing is just the education of the academics within the university to know exactly what's going on, because until somebody tells you, you don't have a clue what you have rights to and what you don't have rights to.
I agree fundamentally. It's interesting that I wrote an article for looking at sort of the impact of the internet in K-12 education many years ago, and actually it was an edited volume where Paul Peters wrote another piece, and there was another author, and we were talking about the notion of K-12 education, we were talking about credibility, these kinds of things. And we all came up to the same conclusion, which is that a K-12 school is the worst place to teach about credibility of information on the internet. And the reason was because K-12 schools had created a rarefied environment. In other words, they filtered their internet access. They would only bring in quality materials. The example I gave is, who wants to be the first to stand up in front of the parent-teacher organization and say, I want more crap in my schools, right? But the reason is because you need to see the crap and say, that's crap and why it's crap, right? So what we do is they come into our schools, we filter out all the bad, nasty stuff where we have support groups, professional educators, counselors, nurses, and we send them home to do it at 11 o'clock at night on their phones. And yeah, that's healthy. The same thing could be said of how we address privacy. That is that people come in and we've either made it impossible to infringe on privacy, yeah, we tried, or we've made it so that they don't get to make the decision. We automatically delete records, even though, of course, they're coming through an internet service provider that can show everything that they've done anyway. So we've created a false sense of privacy. But we don't talk about it. It's so important to us, we don't talk about it. That doesn't make sense to me. You're absolutely right that one of the fundamental things librarians need to do is educate. Educate in how we manage content. How do we organize the content? Have you ever had a discussion with your digital library about learning styles? Because we want people to use our materials. We want them to come in and learn from them. Are they haptic learners? Are they visual learners? Are they right-brained? Are they left-brained? How do they organize this? How do we have different interfaces for different learning styles, right? Why don't we have that discussion within how we organize our system? And then your point largely, which is we can then work with the entire academy to do this. One thing that drove me nuts is I sat in a meeting around institutional repositories. And they all had the same idea, which was all our scholars are producing all this material and sending it out to the world, giving it away for free, we have to buy it back. This needs to change, they would say. Yes. And then the next line would be summarized as, we'll wait for the scholars to figure it out, and then we'll know how to approach it. You seriously are going to wait for me to figure out how scholarly communication, information, dissemination, storage, access, and management works? Are you nuts? We're going to trust a physicist for figuring out metadata schemas? We're going to understand that someone who works in biology is going to understand licensing arrangements? This is a fundamental role for us to play in how we shape scholarly communication, how we do altmetrics, how we evaluate impact and assessment. This is a leadership role, and it's a teaching role, and one needs to be one that's people-oriented, people-pushed, and highly visible. So,
Can you agree more? Thanks.
Hey, David, this is Roy Tennant. As you know, I'm in love with you, okay? Now, it's easier for me to love you with eyebrows, though, so try to keep those. Or if you lose them, pencil them in or whatever. But since you know that I love you, allow me to hate on you for a moment, okay? And I'm going to hate on you because, as you know, this is a room full of geeks. And we're not really known for our social abilities, if you will. So basically what you've done is you told us to focus on the single hardest part of what we do, which is to create and facilitate communities. And now I'm all of a sudden really, really scared. I know we just had Halloween, but now I'm really scared that we don't have the right people in the room to do the kinds of things that you're suggesting we do with our digital systems. So I don't know. I don't have a solution for that. I'm wondering if you do.
One, yes, you need to talk to people. I have this Bazinga T-shirt, and I was wearing it when I was in the hospital when I was first diagnosed. And one of the nurses asked, "Oh, I love that show. Do you have colleagues that are like Sheldon on Big Bang Theory?" I said, "Oh no, they're all great people." And then one of them came to visit me and asked how long, but how long do you really want to live? I thought, more than a week would be nice. I don't know. And so what? I understand that. So let me then take a moment and say I understand that we have people who are really good at engaging conversations and those who aren't. I get that. But let me then take what I said and put it in nerd language because I'm a system geek as well. I'm a geek language. Nerd language would involve much more take point classes. Think for a moment of the document-like objects you have within your repository, right? So you have this series of document-like objects with a series of metadata. You probably are working with single schemas or possibly multiple schemas, but all of those schemas really are founded on the primary concept of the primary object and the secondary object. The primary object is the text, the secondary object is the annotation. The problem is if you switch it around and say, we're not looking at the objects first, we're looking at their use first. Then what happens is the annotation is actually the primary object, what it means, and the text becomes the secondary object. But the problem is different utilizations are going to switch it. So this whole concept of document-like object with primary and secondary objects dissolves. And you go, well, what are we left with, Dave? Screw you. And I said, what we're left with is a series of what actually RDA and its underlying structures of RDF give us in semantic web technologies, which is relationships. As someone goes through our collections, what tools do we give them to create unique connections and unique ontologies of our own materials? Now, how does that, you say ontologies and unique ontologies to a member, to a user, and they're going to look at you like you're insane. So what you say is, tell us your story. And as they're telling you their story, they're connecting and linking and, oh, look at this and look at that. They think they're doing storytelling. They think they're talking to human beings. Really, we geeks behind it are providing the infrastructure that allow for multiple schemas and ontologies, multiple connections. And so do we need to have that conversation with the end user? Not necessarily. But we need to look at how we structure these repositories at a very fundamental technical level to allow the notion of interchange, the idea of multiple iterations, the idea of multiple ontologies, and the connections of things not hierarchically, but relationship-oriented. So I can have this conversation in geek talk. I can have this conversation in inspiring talk. But the problem with the geek talk is that's what we need to do, but it's always going to fundamentally come back to why we need to do it, which is because this is how people think and learn, not because this is how it's easy for the computers to implement. And I love you too, Roy.
Hi, this is Shane Beers. I'm going to speak in some generalities, so everyone have to forgive me a little bit. I think, excuse me, I also want to thank you for the nice reminders of what we are as librarians, as a collective. In my limited experience with libraries, I think that there's kind of this gap that exists between larger research organizations and the things that they're doing, and smaller organizations who are making an attempt to do something for their community and for their local users and patrons and members, as you said. And I think that there's something in between. There's like these collaboratives and collectives, consortial efforts that people are making. And for all three of these things, there's more or less success. And I think that in some ways we are not as a group as successful as we want to be. And I don't think that we're moving as fast as we need to be. And I'm curious, I'm going to ask you to be a forecaster and give us your thoughts about where we can move as a collective group of librarians to really make substantial change for for all of our collective patrons. Because I think, the reason I say I think we need to move faster and be more successful is I think myself, colleagues, I know people who are working at especially smaller organizations because of limited resources, new hire and pessimism, one of the best terms I've heard in recent times, is said that we're looking at other options. We're frustrated. We feel like we're going up a hill with full support, both internally and externally, from the libraries that we work in. Again, I'm speaking in generalities. I'm sure there are many happy people doing successful things. So again, I'm going to ask you, what do you think we can move towards as a group, and the types of services that we can offer, and the way that we assess how successful we are doing the services to be more successful in the long run?
So thank you for setting up a great advertisement for my book, The Atlas of New Librarianship. But no. Roundabout way of answering the question, which is my favorite quote, comes from Alan Kay: the best way to predict the future is to invent it. I think that we are in control of what our future looks like and how it's shaped. And I think that what's interesting is that, as you pointed out, if we buy that, there are some librarians that have a different vision of the future, which is like today, but with a later date attached to it. And there are some that see it as fundamentally different. There's some people, whether it's member-oriented, whether it's technology-oriented. We know that some directors feel that it's, all academic libraries are going to be special collections, and all public libraries are going to be Danielle Steele collections. The thing that we need to, as librarians, and once again, using that very expansive definition of that word, the thing that we all need to be part of is to realize that we're all shaping that future. That what is the future of libraries is the wrong question. What should be the future of libraries and librarians is the right question, and we're forming it. And so those who feel like they don't control the future so they don't change, they're shaping the future as well. They need to understand that. So the first is to talk about every one of us is in control of our own destiny and stop worrying about libraries going by the wayside. I wrote a blog post about stop trying to save libraries. They're here. They're going to exist if we want them to move on. But in order for that future to occur, we've got to actively work and be part of it. And in order for that, we need to see ourselves as professional and visible in doing it. So how can we move things ahead faster? I think the way we move things faster is we get out of our damn stacks and our damn buildings and spend time in our meetings, but our meetings aren't with ourselves. It's with our faculties. It's with our Chamber of Commerce. It's with our local historical societies. It's with our clients. It's out of the building. Get us out of the building and sit and listen to what conversations people are having, then align things. And I found that changes attitudes very quickly. Librarians come back and they suddenly go, oh, that's much more interesting than talking to myself. And so that helps push it forward. But part of it is that back to that radical change agents, we cannot sit quietly in those meetings and let the historians run the meetings. And I don't mean this as a PhD in history. I mean those people who start every comment in the meeting with, what you have to remember is, right? Followed by some outdated concept and the word no, right? We would like to take user submissions on our website. What you have to remember is that time in 1948 when Bob brought in his Playboy collection and he said to take it. No. You're like, shut up. Right? We have to be proactive. This means leadership has to shut up and listen as well. One of the things that drives me nuts as a preparer of new librarians, right? So the new librarian gets this wonderful aura about them. They're just hired, and they're new. And they're always called young librarians for some reason, and regardless of their age, right? They could be walking with like a walker and oxygen tanks in 98, but they're the young librarians because we just hired them. And we say, good, change the world, right? We're going to give you a cool, fancy title like engagement engineer, librarian. And you're going to bring us into the 20th century, forget the 21st century, and go, right? You don't know the culture. You're the lowest person on the totem pole. I, as the director, certainly am not going to change because I've hired you to do that for me, and have a good day. Or we get together and we form the innovation committee, where
every third Friday we get together in a room full of donuts and dream outside of the box, right? Innovation happens every frickin' day of every frickin' minute. It happens in figuring out how to circulate better. It figures out how to tag things better. It figures out how to make PowerPoint give us the right blue, or work in my case. This is a matter of innovation. We as a profession have no more room in it for worker bees, for people who can accomplish a task that's given to them. We don't have the time for that. And we don't have the time to develop all the skills of our partners, so we need to bring in those PhDs in English and physics, and we need to bring in people with masters in instructional design, and people who have no high school degree but are brilliant at doing this. And we need to get rid of the status and replace it with the mission and our objective, which is better service, better communities, better learning. And so that means that we got to stand up, and my father had a great phrase. He says, you can always tell a pioneer. They're the ones with the arrows in their ass. We got to take a few arrows as part of this.
Hi, this is Nathan Hall from Virginia Tech. So when you're talking about meanings of information earlier, and one of my favorite answers, as you said yours was the person who said, I don't know and I don't care. And that reminded me of a very similar conversation I had as a first-year doctoral student who was taking a theory of information class, and I was talking about some of these concepts within the field of information. It was 4 jobs ago. It was sort of a, he was sort of in the I don't know and I don't care school. I was talking about, what is information? I was, excuse my language, he goes, shit, I don't know. And I went back to my professor and thought, okay, that's kind of charming and cool. And I went back to my professor and I told him that, and he said, yes, that's actually accurate, because the active information is informing someone, so it's giving them what they don't know. So it's really big. There's a lot of things that we don't know, and things that are different from what someone else doesn't know. So what do we filter out? And also, the last 2 keynotes that I've been to talked about sort of time. Let's see, John Walensky was saying, oh, you know, repositories, digital libraries, whatever. This is all temporary. Until we get to something else. It's really about the open access of the conversation, which seems to be a bit of what you were saying. And then Cliff was saying, we can't do this forever. It's going to be only for the next generation. So I kind of want to put that out this spot or two. So again, what do we filter out, and I guess kind of how long do we do it for in this model?
It's a really interesting question. So if I got it right, what is a little garbled, so make sure I do. What do we filter out? Well, we can include so many things when we look at it. When we don't know what information is, how do we even know what domain we're in? Because it gets so diffuse that it's like the famous line that, once again, my favorite digital librarian, Bill Arms, once said, the internet is a digital library. So we're done. Hey. I think the short answer comes in, we don't need to filter out as much as we used to. The idea, for example, we used to talk about in cataloging noise reduction. I mentioned that before. That is, you keep the catalogs as clean as possible. And now with the idea of linked data, what we really want to do is keep, yes, that piece really clean, and this piece really clean, but we want to be able to connect them like crazy, so when you take the whole thing, it looks really messy. And that's okay, right? So what that comes back to, the geek talk about how do we organize our systems. And the one thing we need to organize our systems around is allowing multiple languages and multiple ontologies, and then allowing our members to do the filtering rather than us having to do it to begin with. So, for example, if we work with a group of digital humanities scholars, and they agree that they would like to build a collection around Hawthorne's works, and so we digitize the works, we put them online, and then we say, okay, comment, annotate, create, refer, and someone says, well, I want to relate Hawthorne's work to this movie. Let them. And then you hear, oh, but then suddenly we're in movies and all this other stuff. Fine. What you need to build are better tools that allow members to say, show me this view. Now show me that view. Now show me that view. But the bottom line comes to an ongoing participatory conversations with those that we seek to serve. Let them define the boundaries. Let them define what's in or out. but not in a completely submissive way. You know, I can talk about 50 Shades of Grey now. No, not in. As a librarian, we don't simply sit back and say, "Go, what do you want?" That's the same thing as saying, "Let the scholars figure it out, and then we'll catch up." As librarians, we do have a role to say, "Okay, if you want to include all this, you want to include that, realize it's going to be harder to find each individual item." Or what I would suggest is, in other words, we're a member of that community having the conversation. This is the big thing that I want people to think about. I don't want you to simply take away from this, let the users add stuff to our libraries. That's completely wrong. You are the users, those who consume are the users, the PhDs are the users, the people in the community are the users. Together you form a member. You are a member of that community, and as the community improves, your position improves within it, right? A doctor who goes and works in an area of epidemic cholera, his success is not more cholera, right? His success is not, "Ooh, now I have cholera too, yay," right? His success is that everyone agrees to get rid of it, and the fewer people, the less work he has to do, the better his life is because the community he's living in is healthier. The same thing happens here. By inviting our members in and understanding we have a voice as a member, but they have as a voice as a member, we let the communities begin to define what gets filtered in and what gets filtered out, as opposed to a 5-year-long strategic plan. We do lots of surveys, hope for the best, and then add metadata to it.
Any more questions? Actually, I think we're out of time. So please join me in thanking David. It's great.